we're going to turn to our speakers who are here as we prepare for Yizkor. We have two traditions. One is to invite Yizkor speakers who share a little bit of their journey about either their loved one and their loved one, about the process of mourning and or reciting Kaddish. And that's become our tradition over the last number of years. We'll do that before we dedicate new plaques on memorial boards into Yizkor itself. Our first speaker is Suzanne Cooper. She and her husband, Stu Jacobson, have been members of the shul for 23 years and live here in Lexington. She received her BA from Smith and her PhD in economics from Stanford. She's been on the faculty at the Harvard Kennedy School and is the academic dean for teaching and curriculum, working on a broad range of academic and faculty issues. She also teaches a course where students pursue their capstone exercises in policy analysis on various topics that they care about. She serves on our Temple Emunah board and is a member of our finance committee. And I could say, having worked closely with her on different aspects of fundraising and making sure people have the ability to support the community in different ways that are meaningful to them. It's a real pleasure to have that opportunity. Your insights always bring great significance and great help to me and to the shul. Suzanne and Stu have two sons, Noah and Benjamin, who grew up here at Temple Emunah. We had the opportunity to celebrate at their smachot. And Benjamin is in California and Noah in DC. Bavakasha.
Before I launch in, I just want to acknowledge that my brother Scott is on Zoom. He doesn't live locally. He's an affiliate member. And when I say my parents, I mean our parents. And in fact, one of the anecdotes I'm going to share is actually from Scott. I finished saying Kaddish for my father while my mother was dying and ended up with a few weeks in between the end of one 11 months and the start of the next. In my few minutes this morning, I'd like to tell you a bit about each of our parents. My father was a physician who cared deeply for his patients. He was seemingly never not thinking about his patients, and yet he was always fully attentive to us when he was with us. And I really never knew how he did that. When Dad was in Salem Hospital near the end, he was a patient where he'd spent his career as a physician and chief of medicine. A staff member approached us and said she'd been working there for a long time, since the days when patient charts were loose leaf binders. She remembered that a doctor had once dropped one of those binders, and it sprang open and spilled papers all over, all out of order, all messed up. She thought she would have to put all those pages back together into the chart in the correct order. But no, that doctor was Dad. And he got down on the floor and he picked up all the pages and he put everything back into the binder in the correct order himself. That combination of kindness and taking responsibility and always thinking of others and never being a burden to anyone was so characteristic of him. In the last years of his life, he needed a lot of help, and I know he hated that. I'd ask, Daddy, is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable? He always replied with a very simple no. On a good day, I would follow up and say, well, would you tell me if there were anything I could do to make you more comfortable? Dad would say no. And on the few very best days, he'd smile when he said that. Dad wouldn't tell you that there was something you could do for him, because that would inconvenience or bother you. He was unfailingly gentle and kind and always thinking of others, never of himself. I suppose every daughter thinks their father is a giant. But I was surprised when one of the hospice volunteers referred to Dad as a giant, because after all, Dad was 5'4" at his very best. One of his longtime colleagues described him this way: one of the most honorable people I have ever known, humble, brilliant, kind, and just. He really was a giant, and not just to me, for his patients, for his colleagues, and yes, for me too. Mom was a high school English teacher And at her funeral, as each person started to speak, they noted how carefully they'd proofread their notes for grammatical errors. She embarrassed me endlessly by being the teacher who would stand on a desk, sing, put on a chicken costume to teach Chaucer, and just generally find whatever way possible to have an impact on her students' lives. Not boring. As one former student said to me, "Your mother was one of the people who showed interest in me and supported me to reach beyond my circumstances." Mom was upset when a student made it to her class without sufficient literary skills to graduate. She felt the system sometimes passed a student along year after year, but without the necessary skills. So in her retirement, she volunteered in, and then, as was typical for Mom, eventually led a literacy tutoring program at one of the elementary schools that feeds that high school where she'd spent her career. She wanted to tackle the problem long before those kids got to high school. And she brought her same energy and willingness to meet the kids where they were and not be boring to that work as well. And she was there for my brother and me in so many ways. When Scott spoke at her funeral, I learned ways she was there for him that I had never even known about. For me, in her retirement, she was up before the sun on Thursdays to come to Lexington from Marblehead, beating the traffic and our alarm clock so that she could help get the kids off to school and be there to pick them up on the every Thursday half days while I was working. She wrote books for the kids, helped them write stories, always having fun with them, and always making sure literacy was involved. I was so lucky to have Mom as a role model. Not many women of her generation had a long and successful career like she had. She was lucky and smart to marry a man who wanted her to have that, but she made the most of every opportunity to be herself. As I said earlier, I'm now 18 months into a 22-month journey of 11 months plus 11 months separated by just a couple of weeks. I've reflected a lot on this process and just want to share a few brief bits of those reflections. Over one summer in college when I was home, I went to my childhood shul with Dad to say Kaddish for his mother, my grandmother. I remember, not too much, but I remember that the Ashrei went very fast and everyone seemed to know it but us. But more than that, I remember the people and the feeling of being together. Fast forward almost 40 years to my starting to say Kaddish for my father. At least I knew the Ashrei by then, because of course my children learned it here at Temple Emunah Religious School. So that part was different. But the feeling of community is the same. I've gotten to know people I didn't know before and to feel connected to them. It didn't start out with any specific goal to be here every single day for the 11 months or a specific number of times a week or whatever. I fit one minyan into my day because it was important to me. I said to someone who was just starting the process after I'd been in it for a few months, she asked how I could possibly do it. And I said, I was doing it for as long as it worked for me. And I'd keep doing it as long as it felt right to me. 11 months sounded daunting, but doing it as long as it felt right, less daunting. It was really hard to say Kaddish at the beginning, emotionally, but also technically. I'd forget to come back in as the mourner after the congregational line together. But it became more familiar as time passed. What I really valued was that moment each day to remember my father. And I really missed that when the 11 months ended. Then I got a card from a fellow Emunah member who noted that it can feel like something is missing when you stop saying Kaddish every day. I hadn't expressed that to anyone, but it was exactly how I felt. And it meant so much someone else understood that. And it meant even more that she took the time to send that note that essentially said, I get it, and I'm thinking of you. Wow, this place. Now that I'm in my second 11 months, I do sometimes forget which parent I'm saying Kaddish for. They blur together because I never really had enough of a gap to stop feeling like I was saying Kaddish for my father every day. Mom and Dad were married for over 65 years. They were always together and spent barely any nights apart in all of those 65 years. So I have trouble thinking about them separately. And so I've decided maybe it's okay that I don't. And that's part of why I told you a bit about each of them, rather than spending more time on just one of them. In my many months in this process, I think I've said the alternate prayer. It's on page 30 of the Shabbat Siddur. The one for when there's not actually a minyan, just twice in this entire time that I can remember. That counts days of snow, ice, rain, sleet, and everything else, twice. It required some gymnastics at times and support from so many people in this community. Mike Rosenberg, Zichrono Livracha, was responsible for some of those gymnastics. And my favorite example was when we had a minyan, but not in time for the first mourner's Kaddish opportunity. So it was going to wait for the end. But one person had to leave early for a medical appointment, and we were just a minyan. And it was a Torah reading morning. Mike asked one person to take a walk, so we wouldn't have sufficient people for a Torah reading, which made the service shorter. And then the person came back for Kaddish, which was 15 minutes earlier than it would have been, and while we still had a minyan. That made it so crystal clear to me that the people were there so I could say Kaddish, and that they were willing to go to some lengths to make sure that I could. To those of you who are the minyan regulars, that is truly the greatest gift and support you could give. I will never have the words to express how extraordinarily grateful I am for this community. There are countless ways in which individuals and the whole have supported me through a very difficult time that also included losing my closest college friend of over 40 years just a month after my mother. I'll get to the end of 11 months of Kaddish for my mother in late September. And then I'll figure out a different way to ensure that I have a moment every day to remember and think about my parents, who they were, and how much they gave me and Scott. And I'll also support the minyan for those who come after me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. May both of your parents' memories be for a blessing.